Somewhere in the waters, off Korea, in 1951, a naval surgeon aboard a Canadian warship prepared to operate on wounded soldiers. He had no medical degree. He had no surgical training whatsoever, and every single one of his patients survived. The man performing those surgeries was Ferdinand Waldo Damara, Jr., a high school dropout from Massachusetts who had already assumed more identities than most people will hold jobs in a lifetime. He would come to be known as the Great Imposter. His story would inspire a best-selling book, a Hollywood film, and decades of disbelief. But behind the audacity lay a trail of stolen identities, real victims, and a man who could never seem to be himself. Ferdinand Waldo Damara Jr. was born in December 1921 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. His father operated movie projectors in the city's theater district, and for a time, the family lived comfortably. Then, the Great Depression struck. The Damara family fell from comfort into poverty. For young Ferdinand, the experience of losing status would leave a lasting mark, a hunger to be seen as someone important. At just 16, Damara ran away from home. He didn't head for the city or the rails. He joined a Cistercian monastery in Rhode Island, seeking a life of religious devotion. He stayed for roughly 2 years before being told he wasn't suited for monastic life. Rejected by the religious order, Damara enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1941. Within roughly a year, he deserted, and it was then that he crossed a line he would never come back from. He assumed the identity of an army buddy named Anthony Ignolia. Damara was widely reputed to possess an extraordinary memory and exceptional intelligence, though neither claim was ever formally verified through testing. What is certain is that he had a remarkable ability to absorb technical knowledge rapidly and project unshakable confidence. He operated on 2 personal cardinal rules. First, the burden of proof is on the accuser. Second, when in danger, attack. These principles would carry him through imposture after imposture for nearly 2 decades. Under assumed names, Damara joined the U.S. Navy and trained as a hospital corpsman. When that grew too risky, he faked his own suicide and adopted the identity of Robert Linton French, a doctor of applied psychology. As Dr. French, Damara taught psychology at Gannon College in Erie, Pennsylvania. He had no degree, no credentials, no formal education past high school. Nobody checked. His documented impersonations are staggering in their range: civil engineer, sheriff's deputy, assistant prison warden, lawyer, child care expert, cancer researcher, editor. He posed as both a Benedictine monk and a Trappist monk at different points. As Brother John Payne of the Brothers of Christian Instruction, Damara helped co-found Laminis College in Alfred, Maine, an institution that would eventually become Walsh University in Canton, Ohio. A con artist had helped build a real university. Then came the impersonation that would make him infamous. Damara befriended the real Dr. Joseph Sear, a physician practicing in Grand Falls, New Brunswick. He gained access to Sear's credentials and used them to enlist as a surgeon lieutenant in the Royal Canadian Navy. Aboard HMCS Cayuga, during the Korean War, Damara performed emergency surgeries on wounded South Korean soldiers. The precise number of patients is disputed. Sources range from 3 to as many as 19. What is consistently reported is that none of them died. The real Dr. Joseph Sear, the man whose identity had been stolen, was practicing medicine in New Brunswick the entire time. He was an unwitting victim of identity theft. his good name attached to feats he had never performed. When asked, years later, what drove him, Damara offered a disarmingly simple answer: rascality, pure rascality. But the scale of what he had done suggested something far more complex: a compulsive need to prove he could be anyone except himself. Damara's first arrest came while he was teaching at St. Martin's College in Washington State. The FBI tracked him down, and he was convicted of desertion from the U.S. Navy. He served 18 months at the Naval Disciplinary Barracks in San Pedro, California. Prison didn't stop him. Upon release, Damara resumed his cycle of imposture. What's remarkable is that his undoing almost never came from credential verification. It came from people, from recognition, from coincidence, from sheer bad luck. The exposure that made headlines around the world began with a mother reading the newspaper. Dr. Sear's mother saw reports praising her son for performing heroic surgeries aboard HMCS Cayuga. She knew her son was home in New Brunswick. Something was very wrong. The real Dr. Sear alerted Canadian naval authorities. The Royal Canadian Navy sent a message to HMCS Cayuga stating they had reason to believe their medical officer was a fraud. Damara was investigated aboard the ship. Faced with the evidence, the Canadian Navy made an extraordinary decision. Rather than press charges against a man who had practiced surgery without a license during wartime, they quietly dismissed him. The embarrassment of having been fooled outweighed the desire for prosecution. In 1952, Life magazine ran an article exposing many of Damara's impostures. His face was now recognizable across North America. The article should have ended his career as an imposter. It didn't, not immediately. At a prison in Huntsville, Texas, where Damara had been working as an assistant warden, an inmate discovered a copy of that 1952 Life article. There, in the magazine, was the face of the man running their cell block. Damara's cover was blown yet again, this time by an inmate with a long memory. One teaching impersonation resulted in 6 months in prison, a concrete reminder that Damara's exploits carried real legal consequences beyond mere embarrassment. He accumulated charges of fraud, forgery, theft, and embezzlement over the years, though he served relatively little total prison time. By the mid-1950s, Damara's greatest enemy was his own fame. The Life article had made his face public. Time magazine ran a full-page feature on him in February 1957. He was becoming too well known to disappear into a new identity. In 1959, Robert Crichton published a biography titled The Great Imposter. It became a New York Times bestseller and gave Damara the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. That same year, Damara appeared on 2 television game shows. First, on Ernie Kovach's Take a Good Look in November, then on Groucho Marx's You Bet Your Life just a week later. The Imposter had become a celebrity. A 1961 Hollywood film adaptation starred Tony Curtis as Damara. The movie fictionalized many details, but it cemented the imposter in American popular culture. Damara himself had a small acting role in a 1960 horror film called The Hypnotic Eye, playing, of all things, a hospital surgeon. But fame did not bring peace. When police compiled lists of his known aliases, Damara reportedly told them they had missed some. The exact number of identities he assumed over 2 decades remains unknown to this day. Despite the breadth of his deceptions, Damara was never convicted of any violent crime. His offenses were fraud, forgery, desertion, embezzlement, crimes of identity rather than crimes of force. The total prison time he served was strikingly modest given the scale of his impostures. In 1967, Damara earned something he had never bothered to obtain before, a legitimate credential. He received a graduate certificate in Bible studies from Multnomah Bible College in Portland, Oregon. It was one of the few honest accomplishments of his life. In his later years, Damara served as a hospital chaplain at Good Samaritan Hospital of Orange County in Anaheim, California. For the first time in decades, he used his own name. He was, by all accounts, good at the work. When hospital staff eventually discovered his past, the chief of staff, Philip S. Cifarelli, vouched for him personally. Damara was allowed to remain. The man who had spent his life pretending was finally permitted to simply be. Damara developed a close friendship with actor Steve McQueen during this period. When McQueen was in his final days in November 1980, Damara reportedly delivered last rites to him, one imposter story intersecting with Hollywood's in the most intimate way imaginable. Ferdinand Waldo Damara Jr. died on June 7, 1982, at West Anaheim Community Hospital. He was 60 years old. The cause was heart failure, compounded by diabetes that had required the amputation of both legs in his final years. Damara's story raises uncomfortable questions about the systems we trust. His pattern of discovery almost never came from credential verification. It came from chance encounters, media exposure, and sheer coincidence. The institutions he infiltrated rarely checked his claims until it was too late. The real Dr. Joseph Sear bore the consequences of Damara's most famous deception. His name and credentials were used without his knowledge or consent. Whatever admiration Damara's surgical feats may inspire, they were built on the theft of another man's identity and professional reputation. There is a temptation to cast Damara as a lovable rogue, a charming trickster who outsmarted the establishment. But his physician in those final years offered a more sobering assessment, reportedly describing him as one of the most miserable, unhappy men he had ever known. The college he helped co-found under a false identity, Lamine College, grew and evolved, eventually becoming Walsh University in Canton, Ohio. It stands today as perhaps the strangest legacy an imposter has ever left, a real institution born from a lie. Ferdinand Waldo Damara proved that confidence, audacity, and the willingness to attack when cornered could carry a man through almost any door. But the one role he could never master, the one identity he could never convincingly inhabit, was his own. When asked how many identities he had stolen, Damara told investigators they had missed some. The full count died with him in 1982, and perhaps, in the end, even he had lost track. A new case drops every day. Subscribe so you never miss one.